The First World War had ended in 1918, leaving the German Empire shattered. The Treaty of Versailles imposed punitive terms, stripping territory, limiting military power, and burdening the nation with heavy reparations. Political instability followed. The Weimar Republic struggled to maintain order amid economic collapse, hyperinflation, and ideological extremism. In towns and villages across the country, children grew up in uncertainty. National pride had been wounded, and resentment simmered beneath the surface of daily life. Lengfeld came of age during these years of turbulence. Details of his early life are sparse, as is often the case for ordinary men swept into extraordinary circumstances. He was not a prominent political figure, nor a celebrated intellectual. He was a working man, raised in a culture where duty, discipline, and service to the nation were deeply ingrained values. Like many of his generation, he witnessed the steady rise of nationalist fervor. Economic despair made promises of strength and unity seductive. Into this atmosphere stepped Adolf Hitler, whose vision of a reborn Germany would reshape the nation's destiny. When Hitler and the National Socialist movement consolidated power in 1933, the transformation of Nazi Germany began in earnest. Democratic institutions were dismantled. Political opponents were silenced. A vast propaganda apparatus glorified obedience and sacrifice. For many young men, military service was not only an obligation, but a path to purpose and belonging. The armed forces were expanding, and national pride was being rebuilt through rearmament. Friedrich Lengfeld eventually joined the Wehrmacht, the unified armed forces of the regime. Service in the Wehrmacht did not automatically mark a man as ideologically committed to National Socialism. It was the formal military institution of the state. Many soldiers were motivated by patriotism, economic necessity, or social expectation, rather than fervent belief in the regime's racial ideology. Still, the Wehrmacht operated within a system that increasingly blurred lines between conventional warfare and crimes against humanity. In 1939, the invasion of Poland ignited World War II. What began as a campaign of conquest would become a war of annihilation. Across occupied territories, especially in Eastern Europe, the regime implemented policies of brutal repression and systematic murder. Concentration camps, once primarily tools for imprisoning political opponents, expanded into a network of forced labor and extermination. One of these camps was Buchenwald concentration camp, established in 1937 near the city of Weimar. Originally intended for political prisoners, Buchenwald evolved into a sprawling complex where tens of thousands were subjected to forced labor, starvation, medical experimentation, and execution. Prisoners included Jews, political dissidents, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, and others deemed undesirable by the regime. Lengfeld's path eventually brought him to the vicinity of Buchenwald. By 1944 and early 1945, Germany's military situation was collapsing. Allied forces advanced from the west, while the Red Army pushed from the east. Cities lay in ruins under relentless bombing. Supplies dwindled, discipline frayed. Even as defeat loomed, the regime intensified its brutality, attempting to erase evidence of its crimes and eliminate witnesses. In the final months of the war, subcamps and forced labor detachments connected to Buchenwald were scattered across the region. Prisoners were moved in desperate attempts to keep them working for the faltering war machine, or to prevent their liberation by advancing troops. Conditions grew even harsher. Guards were instructed to prevent escapes at all costs. It was in this environment that two Jewish women managed to flee from a subcamp associated with Buchenwald. Exhausted, malnourished, and terrified, they sought refuge in a landscape still firmly under German control. Discovery would mean execution. For them, every hour of freedom was a fragile reprieve from death. Lengfeld encountered these women during this chaotic period. As a member of the Wehrmacht stationed nearby, he was part of the military structure tasked with maintaining order. He would have known the regulations. He would have understood the consequences of aiding escaped prisoners, particularly Jews. Assisting them was not a minor infraction. It was a capital offense, especially in the paranoid final phase of the regime. Yet, when confronted with the reality of their suffering, Lengfeld chose not to turn away. Accounts indicate that he attempted to help them, offering protection and possibly seeking medical assistance. This was not an act performed in ignorance. By 1945, the fate intended for Jewish prisoners was no secret among those stationed near camps. The brutality was visible, undeniable. To extend help under such circumstances required a conscious decision to defy not only regulations, but the ideological machinery of the state. It required recognizing the humanity of those whom propaganda had relentlessly dehumanized. In that recognition lay the essence of moral courage. The women were eventually discovered. The regime's surveillance was pervasive, and mercy was treated as betrayal. Lengfeld's involvement came to light. He was arrested not by a civilian court, but by elements of the Schutzstaffel, the organization that oversaw the concentration camp system, and enforced ideological conformity with ruthless zeal. There would be no lengthy trial, no public defense. In the crumbling final days of the Reich, swift and brutal justice was the norm. Lengfeld was accused of aiding enemies of the state. The regime he had served as a soldier now deemed him a traitor. In April 1945, just days before American forces liberated Buchenwald, Friedrich Lengfeld was executed. The precise details of his final moments are lost to history, but the timing is tragically poignant. Liberation was imminent. The system that condemned him was on the verge of collapse, yet he did not live to see it. The two women he tried to help survived the war. Their testimony would later illuminate the courage of the man who risked and lost his life for them. In a world where survival often depended on indifference or complicity, his choice stood in stark contrast. After the war, Germany confronted the enormity of its crimes. The horrors of the camps were documented in photographs, films, and survivor accounts. Trials were held. The world grappled with the scale of systematic murder. In this reckoning, stories of resistance and rescue emerged alongside tales of atrocity. For decades, Lengfeld's name remained relatively obscure. He was not part of a large resistance network. He did not plot to overthrow the regime. His defiance was singular, focused, and personal. Yet it was precisely this simplicity that made it profound. He encountered suffering and responded with compassion. In time, his actions were formally recognized. The Israeli memorial authority Yad Vashem, which honors non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust, acknowledged him as one of the righteous among the nations. This title is reserved for individuals who acted without expectation of reward and under threat of severe punishment. It is not granted lightly. Recognition does not erase tragedy. Lengfeld's family lost a son, perhaps a husband or father. His life ended violently, branded by the regime as treasonous. Yet in historical memory, his act redefines his legacy. He stands among those who, within the machinery of oppression, chose to disrupt it, even briefly. His story challenges simplistic narratives about collective guilt and uniform complicity. It reminds us that even within deeply corrupt systems, individuals retain agency. Choices remain possible. They may be constrained, dangerous, even fatal, but they exist. The moral landscape of Nazi Germany was not uniform. There were fervent believers, opportunists, silent bystanders, and quiet dissenters. The risks of resistance were immense. Public opposition often meant imprisonment or death. Private acts of kindness, if discovered, could carry similar consequences. Lengfeld's decision did not alter the course of the war. It did not dismantle the camp system. Yet for the women he aided, it meant the difference between abandonment and hope. In moments of extremity, such differences are everything. Historians continue to debate the extent of Wehrmacht complicity in Nazi crimes. Evidence shows that many units participated in atrocities, particularly on the Eastern Front. The myth of a clean Wehrmacht has long been dismantled. Against this backdrop, Lengfeld's action does not absolve the institution, but it does illustrate that membership within it did not erase personal conscience. His execution in April 1945 occurred as American forces closed in on Weimar. Within days, Buchenwald would be liberated. Survivors would stagger into freedom, bearing witness to what they had endured. The regime that condemned Lengfeld would cease to exist. In post-war Germany, grappling with guilt and memory was a complex process. For years, many preferred silence. Gradually, through education, memorialization, and public reckoning, acknowledgement deepened. Sites like Buchenwald became places of remembrance and warning. Friedrich Lengfeld was not born into legend. He did not seek martyrdom, nor did he imagine that his name would one day be spoken in remembrance among the dead of Europe's darkest hour. He was born in 1911, in a Germany still reeling from the aftershocks of empire, war, and humiliation. His life would unfold alongside the violent transformation of his homeland, and in the final days of that transformation, he would make a choice that cost him everything. This is the story of a man shaped by his time, who in one decisive moment chose conscience over command.